Hey guys, Thomas Cecilia Jr. here, aka Mustached Tom, here to review Netflix's Avatar: The Last Airbender. If you end up enjoying this full series review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you to my petition to help out smaller YouTubers. Second and third to my Patreon and PayPal, where you can help support me and my channel directly. And fourth to my Discord server, you can join, collab, chill, do all that cool stuff for free. And chilling will be reminded at the end of the review. With all of that out of the way, let's get into Netflix's Avatar: The Last Airbender. So, it stands to reason that I should bring up, since I was not even reviewing at the time, the original The Last Airbender, as well as the movie adaptation from that. So, from history, we had the show on Nickelodeon, Avatar: The Last Airbender, and for those who don't remember, it was literally the first show to dethrone SpongeBob SquarePants as the flagship show of Nickelodeon. That was very special because it was the first time that Nickelodeon started airing a lot of shows outside, particularly, say, SpongeBob. In that era, I remember growing up watching SpongeBob, and then once the advent of Avatar: The Last Airbender came out on Nickelodeon, it started coming out more and more. It was rather consistent, and then, like I said, it became Nickelodeon's temporary flagship show until it had its proper ending. And just as a quick end, despite its criticisms of the that I've seen, like the fanbase's general acceptance that The Great Divide, for example, is a horrible episode being the key phrase there, as an entire series, Avatar: The Last Airbender, the original show, was still very much a 9 out of 10 show. It had masterful writing for its time, making its adaptation quite difficult to clearly display. The movie doing so much of the legwork of almost utterly destroying people's beloved franchise of the same name. The movie, obviously, carrying over way too much exposition without any of the emotional weight that made the show much stand the test of time. And it seems as if this version, the Netflix's version, doesn't seem to have learned too many of the lessons from that failed movie, unfortunately. While it does have a lot more heart, I will grant it that much, there does still seem to be quite a few steps missing from making it something as memorable or as well written as the original series, which, to be fair, that might have actually just been lightning in a bottle, as some people use that phrase to indicate that that was a rarity, that this was something that was so well put together. And I think that adapting something that's that well put together is significantly harder. Now, the reason I bring this up is because I saw some people comparing this to One Piece, which I guess is a fair example since One Piece is still considered pretty fresh in the eyes of adaptations that have been coming out. And to be quite frank, I think the comparison is a little bit off in that, technically speaking, One Piece is longer of a series, being over 1,000 episodes. However, I would argue that a lot of One Piece, despite not being filler, is really a lot of filler, despite that. And if I were to pick an arc that can demonstrate One Piece at its best, I would, without question, pick Wano. Like, that is an easy arc to put off over every other arc on One Piece. Like, that is critique One Piece, except there are some key moments in earlier seasons that I would still like to see one for one in the live action adaptation, like when they burn the flag of the Navy is a shot for shot thing I would definitely hope that they can achieve in the level that they do once, if they do reach that part of, One Piece. But here, Avatar, with the exception again of like maybe one, maybe two episodes, there's very little filler, and if there is filler, then it is filling it up with great character exploration of any given character within the context of the original show, which is something that, again, I think is drastically missing here from the last Airbender Netflix series. And granted, again, it has more emotion than the movie. I do think that there is still a large stepping stone between even this and the original show. It is quite an enormous gap. Again, we're talking about a 9 out of 10 show, so replicating that is going to be a hard feat. And I don't think that this Netflix adaptation quite reaches that level. And to go over this, I will kind of go over the best examples of when I think the Netflix adaptation skips over something fairly vital to the series. Now, people have addressed Sokka's, for example, sexism over Katara. Sure, that's a thing that that he had to deal with, and then dealing with Kyoshi, though. So that was I feel like that's a layered part of his character that is removed here, whereas I still think the crux of his character still kind of fits here, where it's more about learning better how to fight and remove movement over the enemy, which is something he still learns here. So I do think that the core element is still there. I just think that they removed the whole sexist element, as they do kind of keep it, but they just maintain it to one character at the end, the season finale of the show. And I guess that's fair, since a lot of people were worried about it, that Sokka's not having that element to his character. But yeah, in terms of outside of that bit, which I don't think is the best example, I just think it's one to definitely still bring up. One I will definitely bring up is King Boomy, actually, because the differences between that is way more extreme in my for an example. King Boomy in this version seems way more aggressive towards wanting to teach Aang, oh, how could you have vanished? How could you have, left behind? Whereas there's this consistently goofy attitude in the original show that, maybe there was still even a bitterness or a sorrowful missingness that was may perhaps have been present, but everything was a goofy test. But it was still in the realms of I'm kind of teaching you in a way that's gonna reach you in a way. Whereas I think the last test in this version, the Netflix version, was way too out of bounds for something that I think that Boomy would ever conceive of doing, quite frankly. I don't think that that's the best way to reach Aang, and I don't think that that comes across naturally, and it almost ruins Boomy's character entirely from, again, an adaptation standpoint. And even with the context, it's he's willing to drop a rock on both of them. What the fuck is he doing at that point? It definitely seems very bizarre. So, there's that. And the other one that I felt was fairly noticeable is the relationship between Aang and Katara. Now, for those who don't remember, in the series, the Netflix, the original series, excuse me, is that they had a young romance in the show. And the episode that really nailed, or like pinpointed, like if you could point to an episode to be like, okay, they are confirming that Aang has feelings for Katara, it is the Secret Tunnel Love episode with them, all in the tunnel together. Here, they completely remove it, have Aang completely separated from the love tunnel, because he's dealing with Bumi, because they're like conflating these two moments into two separate sections, with the love being between brother sibling love, which I don't think needed to happen necessarily. I think that was already kind of like their familial bond was already kind of coming through, so I don't think they really needed this moment necessarily even. But yeah, the young romance isn't even present throughout all of season 1, and already in the original show, by the time that they got to the love tunnel, there was already attempts from Aang to be like, I kind of want to hang out with Katara, like in this way, I just want to kind of hang out with her, like young crush. You can kind of see it even before they reach the secret tunnel, but secret tunnel is the first time where it is explicit. You have them blushing, you have them like, oh geez, oh kissing, oh gee, like freaking out in the show, in the animated show, and here he's not even there. Like, why wouldn't he be there? That's how they got. That's how they all got to Omashu in the first place, if I remember that correctly. I've not seen the show in for like ever, and I think that's pretty much how they get there. So yeah, it is so baffling. Like, they get to Omashu before the secret tunnel, so it's like they reworked secret tunnel in such a bizarre and mishandled way. It's like, why would they do that way? And it's like, they clearly wanted the song, but they didn't know how to how to building block it into the series to have it all the way make sense. And again, have all the character elements also have them all build up. Have Aang's young crush being established here at that point. If the hints already, that preceded that in the original show weren't already like kind of giving off, again, said hints. But now what you have is season 1 is already over because it's only 8 episodes, and Katara and Aang still feel like they're barely even friends at the end of season 1 because of how blazing fast this season moves. And that, it feels like so much significantly less work than, again, in compared to even One Piece, where like you spend like a few moments with like Luffy and I'm trying to remember her name, Nami, and like by the time you reach episode 8, it's like, yeah, you believe what Luffy is saying, and talking with Nami and like wanting to support her and and all that, and it's like, I barely think that Aang and Katara are barely friends by the end of season 1. What the fuck happened with them? And again, it's that rush. And don't get me wrong, there are some moments, very few, between the two. But again, you can only still conflate it to, well, they're friends, and there's nothing more. And by the end of season 1, you knew that Aang liked Katara more than just a friend. You knew that by the end of season 1. We have no clue by the end of this version. And it's like, how are they gonna display that that's gonna be the case moving forward? It's like, you're gonna have to work really hard to do that, and it's probably going to make way less sense now moving forward. It's like, why did you do it that way? You had such a great template of everything being placed, and again, I think it's because so much of Avatar, and again, in comparison to One Piece, I think so much more is actually cut away from Avatar, despite it being a such more condensed show. Yeah, while condensed, nearly every episode was packed with information, with character, with lore, with so much detail. And again, it's not too completely rail against One Piece, but again, I think that the comparison is very apt in that, again, that One Piece is so long in comparison. Again, as I mentioned, that 1,000 episodes. And there are still definitely key moments from One Piece that definitely work, or that you would want to see adapted one to one or very faithfully at the very minimum, and that they do it very successfully because they had the original creator there. Whereas I had just recently learned that the writers for this left, the original writers being of the original series, they left. And I think I can see why they left. They probably had a hand in it, then were probably told, oh yeah, this is only going to be 8 episodes, by the way, or something along the lines of like, you're really gonna have to cut this this moment down, you cut, and it's like, well, shit, there's so much, like, character work, so much, like, every little moment, and don't get me wrong, there are moments in this that work. I don't want to say it, I don't want to make it out to be like this is an absolute failure, because that's the movie. That's what the movie's there for. If you want to see the absolute failure, then, that's what you see the movie for. There are elements that do work here. I just don't think that they work as well in terms of putting together the complete package, as it were, the best adaptation that you could possibly make. For some examples that I think make sense, logically speaking, I think actually introducing Azula earlier actually does make a lot of sense. I think that having her introduced in the original in season 2 was a little always like, where was she then this entire time? If like the whole build, like, it felt like it, it definitely feels like this sort of offbeat of like, we created this new character, like, and we're gonna introduce her. That's very much what Azula felt like in the original, whereas here we kind of understand like, we're building her up already. Like, she's always in the picture because of course she would be. That kind of just seems to track. So again, not every decision that I think is made here is actually all that bad, necessarily speaking. But again, it could come at what cost? Because we also get introduced to her friends. And that does seem like those two should have been brought on a little bit later on. Like she picked them up herself, like she picked them out. That could have been like her thing for season 2, is to pick them out specifically. But here they don't play as much of a drastic role. They're sort of like these side characters, if anything else. And I think a lot of the humor is obviously dropped. A lot of the Avatar humor with its animation could depend on the facial expressions, on the gags of like the like when the Avatar bends in Kyoshi, for example, and you have that one guy that just like freaks the freak out, and he's like, and, you know, he actually like foams out the mouth or something like crazy like that, like absurd comedy levels. You know, and they still try to have like my cabbages guy constantly having his cabbages wrecked and all that, you know, typical stuff. But I feel like the level of goofiness is definitely something that is once again sacrificed to an extent that is quite noticeable. It is the most probably apparent in the first episode, if anything, because a lot of that is serious recap or like introduction for even people who might even be, you know, first time viewers of this medium. And granted, there is a lot of information to get across. Like, again, speaking of the Fire Nation and elements that I do think really work, I do think that that intro is actually a really strong intro. For example, I feel like always having like this puzzle piece type of movement that they do where it's like, we'll attack this, but we're actually going to reinforce in a heavier attack this other location. Have that being the consistent method that the Fire Nation uses consistently is again a good choice. It shows how threatening the Fire Nation is, and to the you know, the downside of it is that some of the writing is a bit more clunky on that front. Sure, however, I do think that it can't be negated that there is a much more a presence of the Fire Nation early on, and that definitely comes across a lot stronger here as an example. So yeah, I think that there is something to be gleaned from this, and that's if you were ever curious about Avatar: The Last Airbender, probably just watch the original show. I mean, honestly, you probably get so much more out of it. So much more of the goofiness, so much more of that lightheartedness that makes the dramatic moments, the darker moments that this, you know, this adaptation is clearly way more focused on. So much so, it makes those moments balanced, and that's the key to The Last Airbender. It's all about balance. Like, speaking of even philosophy, like, that's the entire purpose of the show, or a good chunk of it, is balance between the stuff. You know, the four elements, the balance of that, the balance of the moon and the sun, the balance of, you know, I'm trying to think of like other things, but like, you know, I'm blanking on them right now, but that's okay. Point being is that balance played a key factor. It was one of the many themes of the original show that definitely comes across a lot more crystal clear in the original show. One thing I do think that they're setting up pretty neatly thus far is Avatar's struggle against his previous versions of himself, his previous lives. I do think that they're handling that pretty well thus far, because he is a character that is meant to go against the grain, to go against what everyone has been telling him all this time. Because all the way up until season 4, you know, he was still seeking help. The last person was still like, you gotta kill him, you gotta kill him. And that was like all, you know, end-tailed at the series. Here, they're kind of like sprinkling in every time he goes to a temple. He's like, okay, I'll meet with this one. They say the same thing. They reach the same conclusion. I do like the sprinkling a little bit more, in that sense, of being just constantly reminded of like, oh man, it's gonna have to be this way, right? And having that pushback come from his friends And yeah, I'm gonna have to say friends, because Katara is at this point a friend, not a crush. So yeah, I do think that that is an interesting way to handle the constant reminder, but in terms of everything else, I think, again, it's that balance that helps make the emotional moments hit a lot harder. For example, Iroh in here has a moment where it's like in a flashback where Zuko's talking about Iroh's son who's lost in the war. And this was like on an offbeat, episode, like, of Iroh having his own adventures, and like it was like a thing where like all the other characters, like other than Aang, were having their little side adventures. And this episode was one of the most emotional episodes of the show, and it all came down to the segment of Iroh that was so emotionally done. And yeah, they play the same music, sure, and that helps, definitely. And some of the acting does come through on that segment. I'll grant it, the Netflix version, those two things, but something that really strikes is that this sort of the way that it's being told is significantly different, and both from original to adaptation. There's some way that he's explaining it in the show that I just remember it still sticks with me. It's still very resonant within me. And here I'll probably it's not going to stick with me as heavily. And there are definitely some other elements that I'm already feeling as if they're not going to be able to hit as well if, they get their full adaptation. For example, Katara's revenge against the person who killed her mother. That was a huge moment, and I'm gonna say it, it's one of the best episodes of the original Last Airbender show, is Katara going off with Suki, seeking out the mom's killer, and her, reaching that breaking point, reaching that emotional breaking point, in which she's just absolutely done with it, and we see this pity that she befalls upon the man who's now old and whatnot, and like I don't think that they can do it. I don't have faith in this adaptation that they can even come close to hitting that level of impact now, because of the way they're treating Katara currently. And that's, again, they're kind of like doing a weird reverse thing where it's like they're trying to get her over her revenge so soon. It's like, that was never really a thing that came up all that often. And it really boiled up in that one episode. It's like, well, now what? How are you gonna have that moment? Again, this is something that the adaptation is hitting up against. Is like they're squeezing all of this into one, like for Katara specifically. They're squeezing all of this anti-revenge stuff so early on. It's like, well, that was like one of the things like later on that she dealt with. So how are you gonna deal with it and have it make any sense? Again, this is the building blocks, and it feels like the building blocks aren't all the way in. It feels like some of them have been left out, and it's gonna bite the rest of the season in the ass. I'm telling you, I'm guaranteeing you that no matter what they try to do now, there's gonna be those gaps. It's gonna be really noticeable. And it's really gonna suck, because again, up until I heard that the writers left, I actually had no clue what their involvement was. So I actually had a lot more faith in the show. Now I have significantly less. I have so little faith that they can adapt it properly moving forward. There are characters I'm definitely gonna see, like, them definitely struggle with. Like, I'm so curious how they're gonna do Toph. I mean, she's gonna be coming up in season 2, I'm assuming, right? Like, what are they even gonna do with her, considering how much they've, like, shifted and, you know, and done all that? I mean, maybe they might not have to do too much. I mean, she kind of has the archetype that I think a lot of writers like to see in females these days, that being the badass girl archetype, I guess. Like, a lot of writers seem to like it. I don't know. Like, I mean, I get a kick out of it, sure, myself. Like, I have, like, in my own book, Syndicate X, I have one of those characters. Of course I do. I like that archetype. It works. But again, it could come down to, in comparison to everything else around Toph, though, like the being sheltered part from her by her parents, and then her being blind in certain ways that can be a disadvantage versus what parts, having the whole, like, almost Daredevil-esque type power equivalency, like how much that can come into advantage. The introduction to her metal bending, I wonder if they're going to screw that up now, because it's not something she had originally. And, like, there are just certain elements here as well. It's like, why is Avatar Aang just able to fly on his own? He always needed the glider to do that. Like, I'd be okay if it was like, no, actually, no. It's like, it's like, yeah, it's definitely pushing the limits, because again, the air gliding thing is, like, so integral to him getting around, besides Appa, of course. But yeah, it's like, there are just so many elements, or there are certain building blocks that are missing here that could definitely bite the show in the tail end later. Like, I don't think that they can do Zuko's redemption arc any justice now. Like, I have so many doubts that they can do it any justice. I mean, I think they're doing okay thus far, but, like, man, does it feel rushed. Like, the whole mask episode, that just feels like a complete rush. Like, how they get there, like, all the setup to that in and of itself. They are just there in that episode. Like, in the Fire Nation, all of a sudden, abruptly. It's like, there was so much setup, so much cut up material to get here. And it's like, there's setup to Blue Mask where it feels like they have to do a little bit more extra legwork to explain why he's doing the Blue Mask after the fact, where it's like, that was all predetermined, that was all, like, pre-established, and now they have to, again, in this, not in the Netflix version, because of the way they just jump in, now they have to establish it after the fact of why is he doing it that way. I mean, if I remember the show, I think they even show him getting the mask, and he just, like, suddenly abruptly has one on when he goes in as the Blue Mask. And, again, I think that's already a hit on his, path to redemption, because this is, like, the first time that he's doing a redeeming thing towards his redemption arc, as far as I can remember. I could be wrong on this, but it has been a long time, so there could have been elements there that I missed, or I'm just lacking in remembering of, like, Zuko's character, but I digress. Point being is that, like, I don't know if I have enough faith in this adaptation. If it can get to continue to keep going as is, I don't have enough faith in this adaptation, especially if they keep just doing the 8-episode thing again and again. Like, they're gonna have to cut even more fat out of season 2 and 3. I think that that's gonna create even more obvious, holes and lack of character development and lack of potential fitting of the lore and the backstory and all of that stuff in a seamless, timely way, instead of, again, feeling like you have to fast haul so hard, so insanely hard, where it's just like you're like jumping off of a cliff almost. So just to be clear, in terms of a score, the original show is still a 9 out of 10. The original. The movie is like a 1 out of 10. Like, it's that bad. This is more like a 5 out of 10. It's sort of like an in-between for me right now, as far as where we are. Because again, as I mentioned, there are some things that are working here. Like, don't get me wrong, but there are definitely quite a number of issues that are quite noticeable early on. So that is my final score of 5 out of 10. If you end up enjoying my review of the series Avatar: The Last Bender Netflix edition, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you over to my petition to help out smaller YouTubers, second third to my Patreon and PayPal, where you can help support me and my channel directly, and fourth to my Discord server to join, collab, and chill, and do all that cool stuff for free. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye!